Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of True Consequences Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Carter-Landin, and before we get into it, I need to thank Chelsea G and Aaron B for being my latest patron subscribers. Now let's get into the story. When we last met, we talked about Crickett Coogler, about who she was, where she came from, and all about the events that led to her disappearance. We're going to pick up where we left off today. There would be several conflicting reports on makes, models, and colors of cars. Some witnesses said it was a sedan, others said it was a coupe. The colors varied between light gray, light blue, and blue-green. W.C. McBride would recount that he had seen a light gray car parked on the south side of May Street. The car had official license plates. He said he knew that because the plates only had 3 digits. It was around 3 a.m. when he saw it. He said he knocked on the door of Gateway Gardens and Freddie Barncastle let him in. He stayed a few minutes and then left. He said by the time he left, Crickett and the car were both gone. He also stated that Crickett had been running down the street and had looked behind her several times as if she were being chased by someone. He would later say that he felt that her murder was an inside job. He said that due to the lapse in time between when and where Crickett was last seen, it was apparent that she had waited for someone on Bowman Street. District Attorney T.K. Campbell would say several things about McBride's statement were not feasible, though he never said why. LaFell Oman, the prosecuting attorney hired by the grand jury, was quoted in The Silence of Crickett Coogler as saying that she had been partying with some officials from Santa Fe the night she disappeared. 2 waitress friends of hers said that Crickett had told them she and another girlfriend had a double date with an officer and a politician from Santa Fe. However, if Crickett did have a date that night, it was either before 9:30 p.m. or after 3 a.m. since her whereabouts were well accounted for by several witnesses. Mrs. J.R. Craddock, who lived next door to the VFW club, said she heard a woman and 2 men arguing loudly outside her home at about 4 a.m. She said the woman was crying. She then heard the woman scream, "I thought you were going to take me home." After that, she heard a thud and then nothing more. She ran to her window to see the car, but it drove in the opposite direction of the house. Rumors started flying about Crickett. Several people said that she was pregnant and had confronted the father and demanded that he marry her. There was speculation that he was married, which meant that he couldn't leave his family for Crickett. Some people believe that the father was Apodaca or some other high-ranking politician. It's important to remember that no matter what Crickett was involved in, she was a victim. A very young victim. It doesn't matter what people do with their lives. They don't deserve to be murdered. Crickett always let her mother know if she wasn't going to be home on any given night. Ollie Coogler searched for Crickett on her own through Thursday, March 31st, hoping Crickett would come home. And then at about 8 a.m. on Friday, April 1st, she called Sheriff Apodaca. She explained that Crickett was missing. As can still be common, he told her that Crickett had just run away. But he did say that every lead would be followed up on. He said that at that point, there was nothing to indicate that Crickett had been harmed. Ollie described Crickett as 18 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall, weighing 100 pounds. She was last seen wearing a gray suit with red shoes and a red purse. She had a burn scar on her left leg. She mentioned that Crickett had not taken her wallet when she left that evening. Sheriff Apodaca waited 5 days to announce that Crickett was missing. On Wednesday, April 6th, the Las Cruces Sun-News announced, quote, "Pretty Cruces girl is missing since Tuesday," end quote. That would have been the previous day, April 5th. She had been missing since the early morning hours of March 31st. Over a week after Crickett's disappearance, on April 9th, Apodaca encouraged anyone with information to come forward. On April 12th, Ollie Coogler asked Sheriff Apodaca to organize a search party. The pressure of complaints from the people of Las Cruces combined with the front page news stories and phone calls prompted Apodaca to recruit 30 Boy Scouts to search for Crickett. He would lead this search. The search took place east of the city. Crickett would later be found 12 miles to the south. On April 15th, Sid Howard found a red shoe about 4 feet from the west side of Highway 80 as he was driving between Mesilla Park and Mesquite. He would later say that he picked the shoe up on about April 4th, but didn't realize the significance of it until he heard what Crickett was wearing when she disappeared. He also claimed he saw blue or green paint on the sole. He called Sheriff Apodaca to report his find. Sheriff Apodaca said he would get back in touch with Sid. When he did, the sheriff told him, quote, "Bring the shoe to Las Cruces next time you come up," end quote. Sheriff Apodaca was acting like this wasn't a big deal. Certainly not evidence in a murder investigation. Apodaca took the shoe to the electric shoe shop where the workers identified it as belonging to Crickett's sister. There had been a brace put into the sole and a crack in the sole had been repaired. The same day, officers took the shoe to Ollie Coogler's home, and Ollie and Crickett's sister Willow identified it as one of the shoes that Crickett had been wearing when she disappeared. Reporter Alice Groover went immediately to Sheriff Apodaca to ask about the shoe. She was stunned by his response. She's quoted as saying, "His responses were very peculiar. He just brushed me off, said the shoe didn't amount to anything, when anyone knows it may have provided vital evidence in a murder case." It was about 4 p.m. on Saturday, April 16th, that 4 boys who were out rabbit hunting found Crickett's body in the desert near the abandoned Mesquite Cemetery. Jerry Hawkins later described finding her body to Walt Finley. Quote, "We were hunting rabbits when Jerry Smith found the body. We looked at the body for a few minutes before walking back to the car. Then we drove to my house and called the officers. All 4 of us went to Carpenter's store to wait for the officers. When Deputy Sheriff Roy Salmon arrived, we all got in his car except for my brother Charles. He waited at the store. We showed Deputy Sheriff Salmon the body. The woman was lying on her back. Her clothes were pushed up around her neck. The lower portion of the body was naked. It looked like someone had put 2 or 3 shovels of sand on top of her. There were car tracks on the dirt road about 35 feet from the body. It looked like someone might have turned a car around after getting rid of the girl. When Sheriff Apodaca got here, I think he drove over the tracks." The following was an account of Jerry Smith as told by his brother Glenn. Jerry would later contradict this story. Quote, "I was running toward a rabbit when I first saw the body. I stopped and called the other boys over. We got in the car and drove to the Hawkins home and phoned the sheriff's office. When we went back to the grave, I saw some car tracks near the body. I didn't know whether the tracks were deep enough to be of much help or not. The wind had been blowing for several days. When Sheriff Apodaca arrived, he drove his car over the tracks and continued to drive past the body. Then he turned and reversed his car back towards the body. In other words, he half-circled the body with his car. He stopped at about 30 or 40 feet from Crickett's body. He seemed nervous just like everybody else. He started swinging his arms. Tommy Graham told Happy he couldn't pick up the body in the ambulance he was driving. He said he would have to go back to Las Cruces and get another ambulance. I rode with him back to my house." End quote. Jerry Smith would later say that the words were attributed to him weren't entirely true. He had not gone to Carpenter's store with the others. He chose to stay with Crickett so that the others could find him in the tall mesquite. He also said he didn't have any impression that Sheriff Apodaca had tried to obscure the tracks around the body. He did say that when Apodaca arrived, he looked at the body, lifted her skirt, which was already pushed up above her knees, and said, "That's her all right." The sheriff then became visibly agitated, swinging his arms erratically and pacing. Border Patrolman Silva Bryant said the killer must have known the area well. At that time, the route to where the body was found involved turning off a canal bank road and curving down it about half a mile before turning west to where the body was dumped. When Crickett was found, several of her belongings were missing. She didn't have her blue and gray plaid jacket, her purse was gone, she had no underwear and no shoes. She had been missing for 17 days. On Easter Sunday, April 17th, the day after Crickett's body was found, M.O. Johnson reported that he had found another high-heeled red pump lying along Highway 80 about 500 feet from where the first shoe was found. Johnson didn't realize that this was Crickett's other shoe, so he placed a brick where he found it on the road and took the shoe home where he placed it in a tree for the owner to find. An intense search was held on the 16th after Crickett's body was found. The search wouldn't start until long after dark. Jesse Williams Jr., Francis Bennett, Billy Durio and Frank Brownfield drove slowly along the edge of Highway 80, using the headlights from cars as well as flashlights to see if they could find any other evidence. They were sure that if the shoe had been left where Johnson found it, they would have seen it. They were also convinced that the shoe had been planted sometime between 11 p.m. Saturday night and the time that it was found on Sunday. M.O. Johnson explained that as soon as he became aware of the significance of the shoe, he called Sheriff Apodaca and told him. It was very early in the morning when he called, which might explain the call that he received from Apodaca about 15 minutes later. When Apodaca called back, he asked Johnson, quote, "What did you say to me earlier this morning?" Johnson repeated his message and Apodaca drove out to pick up the shoe. Apodaca became convinced that the shoe had been planted, but there was never any explanation as to why he thought that. Ollie Coogler would later say, "I don't know who would want to kill my daughter. If we could find a blue-gray plaid coat, an oxblood bag, or the underwear my baby was wearing the night she was killed, we might be able to solve this murder. When I reported my daughter missing to Sheriff Apodaca on April 1st after searching for her for 2 days, he told me Ovida had run away from home. After I identified the red shoe found by Sid Howard, the sheriff thought I didn't know what I was talking about. I haven't talked to him since. Even after my daughter's body was found, the sheriff never did talk with me. District Attorney Tommy Campbell has never spoken to me. Neither one has bothered to tell me if any evidence has been uncovered in the case. Several of my friends have told me I had better be quiet and not push the investigation if I knew what is good for me. When you have a daughter murdered, you feel like you have to do something." Crickett's brother would go on to say, quote, "I don't have much to work with, but no one is going to scare me. I'll never rest until the killer gets what he deserves." End quote. On May 5th, Hubert Beasley, one of the best police chiefs the state had ever had, sent 2 of his men, Captain Ben Martinez and Officer Nolan Utz, to Las Cruces to investigate Crickett's murder. The examination of the site and Crickett's body was half-hearted at best and blundered completely at worst. Tommy Graham, who was part owner of Graham's Mortuary, met Apodaca, Roy Sandman, and Max Johnson at the site where her body was found. He said her face was skinned. The body was lying face up with the arms at its sides and legs straight out. Her skirt was above her knees, but no clothing was torn. She had not been examined for sexual assault because the body was too decomposed. He did say that her left collarbone was broken and there was a skull fracture above her left ear. He also noted that her face, arms, and legs were cut and bruised and that she appeared to have received a blow over her left eye. Dr. Dan Maddox was summoned to do the autopsy. However, at the time, the deceased were sent to El Paso for a formal autopsy. He would later state, quote, "I was in the hospital and got a call from Graham's Mortuary. The body had been identified as Crickett Coogler by friends or family before I arrived. We were a small town and I was the only surgeon. There was no pathologist and autopsies had to be performed in El Paso. Sending the body to El Paso for an autopsy was discussed, but I advised that it was necessary because, although an autopsy could describe where internal organs had been moved, the body was so thoroughly crushed that it could not be more specific than my own examination. She was so slim and her skin so movable, and I could easily describe fractures by simply feeling. And her chest, abdomen, shoulder, and internal organs were crushed. She was so torn up, it was clear that she died of massive and severe trauma. I was told she was an indigent and therefore could not afford to have that done." End quote. The county should have footed the bill for an autopsy. This was a murder investigation, not to mention that the family was not indigent. The Cooglers didn't have much, but they were able to afford the autopsy if it meant that they could find Crickett's murderer. Maddox's initial description also said that the right side of her face had been smashed with a blunt object. Her left collarbone was broken, and dark bruises marked the flesh inside her right thigh. His story would change several times over the years, from his original observations to eventually to him saying that she didn't have any bruising or lacerations, and then back again. At one point, he said that she could have possibly been run over by a car several times. Maddox didn't hide his disdain for Crickett. He called her a, quote, barfly, and described her in the company of politicians a couple of weeks ago before her death as, quote, apparently she was very active that weekend. She was in the middle of the saloon and drinking with everybody. Apparently, they spent 3 or 4 hours. Crickett sitting in the laps of all of them. She would go out for a while and come back in. Nobody really knew. Everyone there was suspicious of everyone else because all of them had been with her that evening. End quote. Because Crickett was seen in such a bad light around town, the investigation wasn't properly done. Evidence wasn't taken or preserved, her family wasn't treated with respect, and ultimately the truth would be hidden. The truth would be hidden to protect people who were much more important than Crickett Coogler. A local reporter who was in attendance at the initial investigation would later state, quote, no samples of deposits under her fingernails were taken. Her clothing was not removed or examined for evidence of a sex crime. The coroner's jury did not view the body. It was being placed in the casket when they entered the room. The examining physician related to them what he had found, and they filed out. An unnamed sheriff's office source disclosed that no pictures were taken at the scene of the shallow grave. The following day, Sheriff Apodaca told the press that Crickett had been the victim of a brutal sex attack. Maddox would later agree since he believed her pelvis was broken. After Crickett's body was put into the casket, it was covered with 100 pounds of lime. That sealed the deal on getting any further evidence. The investigation into her death wouldn't end there, but Crickett Coogler would be lost in her own murder investigation. Other things would take precedence, and she would be almost forgotten as anything more than a name connected with something much bigger. Crickett was young. She was 18 years old when she was brutally murdered and left in the desert. She had been abused and manipulated by rich and powerful men for at least 3 years at the time of her death. She was a victim of rape, a victim of murder, and a victim of the world around her that saw her as nothing more than a barfly, who took favors from rich and powerful men who were so much more important than she. 10 days after Crickett's burial, State Police Chief Hubert Beasley arrived in Las Cruces and immediately went to work on the Coogler case. He insisted that he wanted Crickett's body exhumed to gather evidence. He was looking for skid marks or tire marks on her body, but the 100 pounds of lime that they poured in her casket kept anything like that from happening. There were only bones left. She was exhumed on May 7th, and again, there were oddities reported. Quote, the Public Health Office, contrary to custom, was not notified of disinterment. An X-ray technician was not there by order of a physician, despite the fact that such an order is required. The examination was conducted under a cloak of secrecy. End quote. Milo Sherwood, an attendant at the mortuary, had strict orders from officers to allow no one in and to not release any information. A Sun News reporter who tried to get in overheard a man say, quote, if he comes in here, we'll shoot the SOB. End quote. The official report confirmed by Dr. Leland Evans stated that there was a fracture line on the left temple, fractured cheek and jaw bones, and a complete break of the left collarbone. He found no evidence of a broken pelvis or broken legs. He also said that she may have died of a broken neck. The X-ray showed a shattered vertebra at the point where the neck joins the body. However, because of the time, interpretation of the films could not be strictly adhered to. Lime contains quite a bit of calcium, which can absorb the radiation from an X-ray, leaving a blurred image. The verdict of the first coroner's jury on April 16th showed Crickett's cause of death as death from an unknown object or person. After exhumation, it was changed to death of a violent nature by an unknown cause. Those causes were listed as homicide, suicide, or accident. In the end, nothing was decided. Murder couldn't be ruled out by evidence, but it couldn't be ruled in either. It was never even confirmed that Crickett died on March 31st. Robert Estrada, an inspector at the New Mexico port of entry near Anthony, said he saw a girl that he believed was Crickett shortly after midnight on April 1st on Highway 80. This would have been 20 hours after Crickett was last seen in Las Cruces. He said that he was driving south on Highway 80 on his way home to Anthony when he saw a girl dressed in a gray suit running along the highway. He said she was running unsteadily, as if drunk or wobbly. She was wearing high heels and calling for help. He began to turn around when a dark green Chevrolet or International pickup truck came by, heading north. He said the pickup stopped and two men got out. One began beating the girl, and then the girl was thrown into the truck. It sped north again. Estrada came forward after hearing about Crickett's murder in the papers. Before that, he thought it was some sort of family dispute. He called Sheriff Apodaca's home saying that he had important information on the Coogler case, but no one ever called him to take his report. This would have been a very important lead to follow up on. Major players would have been in different places. Alibis could have been questioned. Governor Thomas Marby insisted that the case would not be whitewashed, even if public officials were involved. He put all of his faith in Hubert Beasley. Beasley was thoroughly qualified to handle the investigation and did explore every angle. For his part of the investigation, Sheriff Apodaca had brought in 5 suspects for questioning, 2 from Las Cruces, 1 from Oklahoma, 1 from Kansas, and the other from Lower Mesilla Valley. A taxi driver was questioned about a fare from the Deluxe Cafe to White Sands Proving Grounds that he had taken on March 31st. One of those suspects was Wesley Bird. The others were simply questioned and released. Wesley Bird was arrested as a suspect shortly after Crickett's body was found. His story would be what would send Happy Apodaca, Hubert Beasley, and Roy Sandman to prison. It would also bring a spotlight down on what was happening in Las Cruces. It was well known that Bird would flirt with white waitresses at Tortugas Cafe, and Crickett was one of them. It's unknown whether Crickett ever met with Wesley privately, but after the manager of Tortugas talked to Happy Apodaca about Wesley's flirting, Wesley became a suspect in Crickett's murder. Bird was picked up for questioning on April 19, 1949, 3 days after Crickett's body was found. Sheriff Apodaca questioned him, and during questioning, Apodaca reportedly hit him in the face with a leather strap. The mark was still there when he was released 2 weeks later. Bird told FBI agents that he had been picked up and taken on a drive with Happy Apodaca, Hubert Beasley, and 2 state policemen. Bird said that on April 28th, he was taken to the place that Crickett's body was found. He then had a bicycle lock and padlock attached to his genitals. Bird was forced to walk with the locks hanging from him in pain while repeatedly being told to confess to her murder. One day before Bird was tortured, Happy Apodaca sent the following evidence to the FBI crime lab. 2 cellophane envelopes, one containing some hair that was supposedly found in Bird's car, and the other from Crickett Coogler. According to the lab, the samples matched, but other officers in Las Cruces questioned whether the hair had been planted in Bird's car. The lab was also asked to test a sample of paint that was found on the bottom of one of Crickett's shoes against the sample of paint from Bird's car. The tests on the samples came back inconclusive for a match. A sweatshirt was taken into evidence that had lipstick on it, and it could have been Crickett's. This search was not performed under warrant, and Bird gave no permission to search his home. Remember, Crickett's purse was never found. It may have had a tube of lipstick in it. The police could have put the lipstick on the sweatshirt as further evidence that Bird was with Crickett the night she was killed. Bird was held for about a week. During that time, he had been denied an attorney. No one knew where he was until his friends missed seeing him around town. When his friends went to see if he was in custody at the jail, they were told he wasn't there. They found an attorney in town who was willing to confirm that Bird was indeed in jail. In the end, Bird was charged with selling a car without a dealer's license. He was held on $500 bond, and his friends raised the money so that they could bail him out of jail. At one point, the police had told Bird that if he confessed to the murder, they would give him money and take him across the border into Mexico. They also told him that he wouldn't spend more than a year or 2 in prison for Crickett's murder. He remained adamant that he was not responsible for Crickett's death. In May of 1949, Byrd sought medical attention. He then found a job for about a month at Central School before returning to North Carolina. Walt Finley caught up with Byrd before he left Las Cruces. After interviewing Byrd, he wrote a story about his arrest and torture. The story caught the attention of FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Because the FBI had been accused of violating civil rights of suspects in the past, Hoover had his radar up. An FBI investigation began into the torture of Wesley Byrd, and their findings were presented to a grand jury in Santa Fe. In July 1950, warrants were issued for Happy Apodaca, Hubert Beasley, Roy Salmon, and Sally Salazar. They were indicted on 2 counts. One count was conspiracy to violate the civil rights of another, and the other count was actual deprivation of those civil rights. Several witnesses were called who could confirm Byrd's story, including Carlos Salas, who said that he was present during the torture and had walked several feet away from the incident and acted like he was looking for more evidence in the Coogler case, because he couldn't stand to watch what was happening to Byrd. An FBI agent also testified that Apodaca had shown him the lock used on Byrd and described its use. In the end, Happy Apodaca and Hubert Beasley were found guilty of violation of civil rights and conspiracy to violate the civil rights of another. Roy Salmon was found guilty of the conspiracy charge. Sally Salazar was acquitted since he only witnessed the torture but did not participate, according to Wesley Byrd's and Carlos Salas's testimony. Roy Salmon and Happy Apodaca only served 7 months in prison. Beasley served 9. Next time on True Consequences. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, New Mexico. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, New Mexico.